Good evening. Thank you for joining us for our 6th speaker event as we celebrate the year of St. Joseph with Catholics around the world. My name is Nikki Wentworth and I am the Stewardship Coordinator here at St. Joseph. Tonight we'll be reflecting on the charism of St. Joseph, the pillar of patience, with guest speaker hiding behind me, Beth Mowatt. We're going to start with a reading from Genesis. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites and brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near me, please." And they came near. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors." The word of the Lord. The story of Joseph is very long, but it's a powerful illustration of how God works when we wait. Joseph had to endure many hardships, and through those hardships, he had to wait for things to get better. He had to rely on God to deliver him from his distress and misfortune. We're all familiar with the cliche, patience is a virtue. We also know that patience is listed in Galatians 5 as one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. So there's no disputing that as Christians, we ought to be patient. But as with most of the virtues, the biblical authors assume we know what patience is, and they don't give it an explicit definition. How many of you can give a worthy definition of patience without ever citing examples? I don't see many hands. For starters, based on my experience, patience means waiting without complaint. Isn't that what we teach our children? They whine because things are not going as fast as they want. Or better yet, on a long car ride, "Are we there yet?" And you want to just turn around and say, "Have we stopped the car? Then we're not there." But you choose a better path and a way that you can actually teach your children something, as good parents should. But what are you really teaching them? When we define it as waiting without complaint, patience might seem morally insignificant trait. So what's so virtuous about not complaining? In and of itself, not complaining doesn't carry any particular virtue. For example, a person waiting on the arrival of their friend to arrive at the airport, and they're sitting there contentedly reading a book and watching television, we wouldn't necessarily call them patient. So what's missing? That thing that's missing is some sort of discomfort. It's because of a circumstance is uncomfortable for someone and they still refuse to complain that makes them remarkable, and we regard them as patient. So our definition needs to be updated to include this discomfort piece. Our new definition could be to endure discomfort without complaint. Our new definition, though, requires us to rely on other virtues in order to fulfill it. For example, self-control, humility, generosity. We can all agree that Jesus was an incredible example of patience, especially when working with his disciples. When they would challenge him or question him or completely didn't understand what he was trying to tell them, Jesus showed patience. The discomfort he felt was the frustration he had with his disciples. Jesus had to exhibit self-control when they asked repeated and seemingly ridiculous questions. He had to show humility by lowering himself to their understanding. And finally, he had to be generous, because despite their thick-headedness at times, and dare I say humanness, he remained completely committed to them and continued to serve them, teaching them through their successes and failures until his final days on earth. Saint Joseph is another example, excellent example of what patience is. He exhibited patience through all the difficulties he endured without abandoning himself to sorrow or ever abandoning God and the good that he was working toward. Some of the examples that Joseph showed great patience include waiting for the Lord to give him direction on Mary's miraculous pregnancy, or waiting 3 months for Mary to come home after visiting her cousin, or journeying with Mary and Jesus to Egypt and not knowing how he's going to provide for his family in a land so far away from home. And yet, as the mirror of patience, St. Joseph endured these difficulties with the help of God's grace and kept his eyes fixed on the good that he was trying to do and the things that made the endurance worth it. His love for his family, his love for others, his love for God, and each of them were opportunities for him to grow in virtue. The word patience comes from the Latin root word pati, which means suffering. In the mid-14th century, the word was defined as capable of enduring misfortune, suffering, etc., without complaint. This is quite similar to the simplified definition that we started our talk with. In the late 14th century, though, the definition changed slightly. It changed to slow to anger, self-restrained, having the temper which endures trials and provocations. Now, this enhanced definition shows the understanding of need for additional virtues in order to practice patience. This alternate definition, this enhanced definition, is actually what led to the word patience being used in the medical field. A medical patient clearly must have patience in order to endure the struggles that they're experiencing through their ailment. Think of a long-term or chronically ill person. They could easily allow themselves to fall into despair and adapt a woe is me or Job-like mentality. As patients, we know that sometimes we just need to endure what we're going through. How many of you guys have had the flu? I've had it. It's horrible. How can you stop feeling nauseous when you have the flu? How can you make that fever go away like that? You can't. Sometimes you just have to go through it. We just need to be a patient patient. Our Christian life calls us to be patient through our suffering and embrace our suffering as a gift from God. Although this is a seemingly contradictory sentence, as Christians, it's simple for us to answer this. Through Christ's passion and suffering on the cross, we have been given the gift of eternal life. We are called to emulate and reflect Christ's life in our own. So too, we are called to suffer for the betterment of others. So I challenge you, next time you're suffering, don't annoy your spouse by complaining, and instead offer it as alms to someone who needs your prayers, someone with whom your suffering can create good. Tonight's guest speaker has lived her vocation doing just that. She helps people foster good out of suffering. Beth Mowatt was one of the first parishioners to welcome me to St. Joseph, and she did so with eager servant's heart. I later learned what an impressive history Beth has in her chosen vocation of nursing. Although Beth comes from a family affinity to nursing, she embraced her own personal passion for caring for others. If you didn't know, Beth has had the opportunity to practice within the following institutional settings: acute care, public health, home health care, hospice, long-term care, and academia. In all of these practice settings, she was able to provide direct patient instruction or patient care, along with being responsible for administrative duties and instruction. She has embraced her role as a compassionate caregiver for over 49 years. Please join me in welcoming Beth to share her story.
Well, I can't touch that, so I just have to do something with my hands. Thank you for the nice introduction. And my journey in nursing has been very exciting, and I hope it's not quite completed as yet. I know that when I told my mom I was going to retire, God bless her, she still is good with her math, and so she sat there a few minutes and she looked at me and she goes, "Yeah, sure you're old enough?" My mom retired as a nurse at 78 years of age, so I guess when I decided to retire, I wasn't quite old enough. So I think I have to do a little more work in the next few years. As mentioned, I do have a wide array of practice settings, and in all of these areas, I've had lots of interaction with all kinds of people. And I say all kinds, and I have been able to interact with people, before they're born or the unborn and to infinity, so from birth to death, basically. Much of my practice, even though I worked in all those various settings, I have worked probably primarily in a community setting. In this area, as I worked, I got to work in a person's own environment to provide care or teaching to them. And oftentimes I look back at those times in the community and I think about the fact that cleanliness was not always next to godliness. I had oftentimes to do a dressing. There might be the cat that's walking along and wanting to investigate the sterile field, or you go to take care of somebody and you leave that home and you might have some fleas jumping off of your legs. Or you walk into the house and it might go crunch, crunch, crunch because, there's a few cockroaches in that place. But I can say that that really helped me because I had a better understanding when I care for people that when I care for them, maybe it's in my own environment that I'm comfortable with. So what I plan for their care is probably bordering on the fact that, I got these four walls that we give care in. But when they go home, it's not always that way. So, we have to think about those things, and that clearly opened my eyes to a lot of things. And so it's always my hope, like in education, that nursing students do get to see people or give just a little care to them in the home because it's an eye-opening experience. It's kind of a humbling experience for me to stand here and share my journey in nursing. And I have to tell you, when I read and saw the little advertisement or what this talk is going to be about, the word evangelize just about sent me off the edge. I was ready to go off the edge of the cliff. So this little angel had to talk me down and off the cliff, and pretty much told me I needed to get a grip, and I thought to myself, you need to get a grip on this. But this whole process has helped me to better understand why I became a nurse, and that my practice as a nurse is inclusive of my faith. I don't think I ever lost sight of that. I just maybe didn't think about that as I practiced as a nurse or am practicing as a nurse. In sharing my journey with you, I have to share a little bit more about me and a little bit about my family, because they're part of the journey. My journey began at St. Joseph's Catholic School, and I was able to attend grades 1 through 6 in the old school, and then I got to go to the present school that we are in. I am a graduate of the Kalama Westphalia Community School System, and I went on to Madonna College then, and now university, and I earned a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and then I completed my educational process at the University of Phoenix with a master's degree in nursing. And contrary to what my nursing students always would say to me or ask, because I graduated from Madonna, were you a nun, or we thought you were a nun? I said, no, I was not. Thought never crossed my mind. My journey did start in our little small community and this little village that we live in. But then I got to experience the city and other kinds of areas that made me want to return to the small community. It's kind of a blessing to return to your own community and to all the surrounding areas. And I still have a few more identities in my life. I am a daughter. And Max Hogle, the mailman, was my father. And Harriet Kramer Hogle was my mom. She's the nurse. I am a sister. I have a sister who just recently retired, like 2.5 weeks, with 40 years at Sparrow as a nurse. And then there's Fred, my brother, who, has survived living, supervision from 3 nurses, let me tell you. But he probably could make a good nurse if it was all said and done. I'm a wife of 48 years. I'm married to Beth Mowatt, and Brad grew up in Ionia. And God bless him, I'm not sure how you could grow up, like about 15 miles away, not know the whole county. The man had never been to Puamo until my first date. And then he had to pick me up at Rosemary Davern's house. So, did he meet my parents right away? No. He met Rosemary. And then I am a mother. I have 2 sons, Jay and Ned, and those 2 boys make us pretty proud. Made me a mother-in-law to Jenny Weber Mowatt and Morgan Schaefer Mowatt. And then we have a couple little grandchildren, like 5, Max, Barrett, Ella, Regan, and Jack. And probably because we have such a long line of nurses, Grandma thought maybe she'd try and plant the seed there. So I said to Max and Barrett, I said, did you ever think about being a nurse? They stood there, looked at me, rolled their eyes. Ella said, you, and made a face. Regan said, no, Grandma, I want to be a witch. I think she's a little confused with Halloween and being a nurse. And then the verdict is out on Jack. So who knows what we'll do with Jack. And then recently I earned the title from my siblings and my cousins. I am a matriarch. Sounds pretty old for somebody who just turned 17 on their last birthday. Now you figure that one out. But all of these people are part of my journey. I love them lots. And so now I need to get into a little sharing of what it means to be a nurse, or as a nurse. What do we do as a nurse? And I don't mean to, maybe for some of you that are nurses, you can relate to some of this, and you'll think, oh boy, I'm sitting back in foundations class. But I think all of you need a little understanding of what this profession is that I am in. As a nurse, we have to focus on the individual, we have to focus on the family, and we have to focus on our community. And when you look at those, we can show them as all these little circles, or we can show them like as a triangle and the little arrows go up and down, because sometimes we care for the family, even though our patient is the individual. The patient is getting everything that they need, but it's the family that we have to give care to. And then you can look at, say, if there's an outbreak or a communicable disease. Sometimes, that individual or a family is impacted by that, but we have to look to the community and we have to decide what caused this issue to happen and backtrack it. So it's kind of like this continuous circle. We also have to include in that component of who that we provide care to is that the fact that we also look at the mind, body, and spirit component of the individual. And so as far as like mind is concerned, it is really kind of a part of our body, but we have issues related to the mind, such as being anxious, maybe depression. Those things are still things that we have to look at. And then we look at their spiritual side. And a lot of times people think the spiritual side of an individual is related or is the religiosity about that person. Well, it really isn't. Religion is included in that, but it's an area that we have to address in the sense because we have to know what that person's belief system is, maybe what their cultural beliefs are. And if we don't, we're probably going to make a mistake when we give care to the person. I didn't touch anything. Okay. So, and I can tell you as a nurse, not recognizing some of that spiritual side, when I worked as a hospice nurse, I kind of almost, I was getting ready to call Adult Protective Services because the family only was giving the person milk to drink. That was all the person was getting. So luckily we have like team meetings when you work for hospice. So I'm like, I don't understand. The person chooses to eat, but all they're giving her is milk. And the pastor talked to me. He said, I have to talk with you about this. He goes, that's because of the culture, that's what they do at the end of life. Lucky for me, I didn't call Adult Protective Services. And that gave me probably my first real beginning knowledge and understanding of what spirit means. And then, of course, there is the body, and I think all of us understand we have to take care of our body. So, like for instance, getting ready for this whole process, I probably didn't take care of my body so well. There's been kind of like a lot of snacking on potato chips and other related things. So, and that's because, my mind was kind of occupied and I was anxious and all those things. So, I'm probably going to have to, do a little penance and not eat quite so much in the next few days. So, at any rate, that's how it works. But as nurses, we have to pay attention to that. Because if we don't, there's going to be an issue. And that's kind of the composite picture of those people that are entrusted to our care. That is for sure. I have a great example of a nurse caring for a person relational to mind, body, and spirit. And God bless this person. She has passed. She lost her life at a relatively early age due to cancer. But Sharon, as I would call her, took care of a gentleman in the county, and the patient had cancer. And so Sharon took care of his physical needs. She had that spirituality quality about her, she was concerned about that. And she worked on his, the mind component because he had some depression. So in this process, She took him to the barber shop, and she got his fingernails trimmed, and his toenails trimmed, and his beard trimmed. But she also talked to him about the spirituality side of things. Was there anybody that he needed to talk to? Did he need to share anything? And just maybe he might want to talk to the pastor. And oh my, he put her off on that one. Everything else was good. He kind of, said, yes, I agree with that. One day she made a visit to check on him. And he goes, that thing about seeing the pastor? He said, I'm ready. So she made the phone call. But when she came back to the health department, she was the happiest person that I could have ever imagined. She was like smiling, dancing. It's like, yes, I got it done. And so I often think about that, because that is, she really fit the bill for what she did with that patient. So I, as a nurse, need to do the same thing, and I've tried really hard, but that was a wonderful experience. Sharon was also a Catholic nurse, along with, sharing about her. So my role as a nurse, I need to promote, prevent illness and injury, and optimize health for those entrusted to my care. I'm also become a caregiver that is engaged and addresses the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. We also need to know our patient. And I can't stress that enough. Because we can practice, but if we don't know the patient, who they are, what they did, what is going on with them, sometimes we can make a mistake as well. And one of the things that I always would tell my nursing students is go down and meet your patient. And they'd look at me like, okay, can't I just look at the chart? I said, no, you can't look at the chart. You're going to go down and you're going to introduce yourself, and you're going to ask that person, who are you? And, tell me a little bit about yourself. Sometimes patients were able to do that. So those students, I let them look at the patient history, and then I would say, now you go down and meet that person and say, gee, I saw that you were an accountant, or I saw that you were a teacher. Any of those things, because a lot of times, even though there is some confusion, sometimes people can relate to that, and so they will respond. But if you get to know the patient, you have this understanding why maybe their behavior is such. And I'll use my mom as an example. One day I got a call when she had been in assisted living for a little while. And I think that the place was a bit offended by it. I just kind of laughed through the conversation. Because what my mother had done, she came out to the desk and she looked around and she said, well, I don't know why I need all of you. I can take care of all of these people. You can finish your shift today, but you don't need to come back. So I got a call, like they thought she was getting agitated. And I remember when Julie and I took her and met with the staff, I kind of impressed upon them is that she's been a nurse for a long time. And even though she has a little confusion or getting more confusion, the nurse never came out of her. And I have that still saved on my phone because once in a while I'll listen to it and it does make me laugh. But again, it illustrates that nurse was still in her. And sometimes in long-term care, when we've had nurses there, we've had to do some very interesting things with them because you might find them unmaking a bed, making the bed. You might have to get an order for them to have a baby doll because they might have worked in OB. All those things. You have to do something. The same with so use the example of the accountant. Those people are pretty precise. And sometimes, I hope there's no accountants here, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but numbers are more significant to them than maybe some people skills. They know 1 and 1 makes 2 and on and on that goes. But yet, if you watch them, everything has its order. And so when we give them care, we better have our act together because they're expecting us, to kind of be able to add 1 and 1 is 2 because that's organized. Whereas other people, no. So just always, that's one of those things. We also have to facilitate healing. And in that, to do that, we use something called nursing process. And if there are any other nurses here, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to sit back in foundations class and I'm going to have to do a nursing care plan. Well, no, we're not going there. We're just going to discuss those terms. It's a process where we have to assess, and when we assess, we discover what the issues are. So it's kind of like a nursing diagnosis that we apply. Then we have to figure out, we have to plan some care for that person. Then we have to implement it, which is caring or treating them. And then we have to evaluate their human response. So again, if you don't understand what you saw when you assess them, and if you don't know about the person, all those pieces, they all have to fit together. We also alleviate suffering. We have to be very in tune to suffering. And suffering, we think in terms of pain, but suffering may not be pain. It may be other kinds of components. It may be the loss of a loved one. It may be the fact that they can no longer be independent, but there's lots of suffering that goes on. And also, we have to advocate for our people. And we have to focus on the whole of them. And probably when I started out as a nurse, I didn't realize that that advocacy role was so important. But as I've grown in my nursing years, I think I'm a pretty good advocate for a person. And maybe, you might want me in my camp. And Brad has another term for when I get on this advocacy role, and I won't say what it is, but my name begins with B, so you can go from there. And then we have to teach those individuals that we've been entrusted to their care, so that and the teaching can be for the patient, but it also has to be for those that will follow behind us or work with us. We have to fill our shoes, but we also have to mentor. And in my time as a nurse, I have taught many, and I have mentored many. And it makes me feel just like a very proud parent when I look at that. And I have had the opportunity also to work with some of those individuals. So that's even a greater gift in that respect. In nursing, we have some little values. They're not really so little, we call them core values. We think in terms of giving care related to human dignity. We have to work as a nurse with integrity, autonomy, altruism, and social justice. We must love God and love one another. That's pretty much how that all fits together. And I think sometimes that as nurses we get the human dignity, integrity, probably all the other ones, but sometimes I don't think that we always get social justice. I also don't think that people within communities or we as individuals always understand about social justice. And really in social justice we have to talk about morals, we talk about the legalities of things, we talk about the humanistic principles related to, things that people need. And I think that we need to really pay attention, and I think in this world that we live in today, there is really great need for more people to pay attention to those things. We practice by giving care. We also use compassion. And compassion is something that the nurses these days are, because we give of ourselves so much. I put down a little note about the compassion fatigue, and that is in referencing to many who work in healthcare, but think about the last year and a half or 2 years and the nurses that are working. They have compassion fatigue. And that's because of what's going on in the world these days. So they need to pay attention to themselves and, care for themselves, because if they get so fatigued, they will probably truly leave, or we will be taking care of them as a patient as well. We communicate with patients. And, when you think about me, I'm running my mouth oftentimes. Outside of here, I run my mouth. But we also have to listen. We have to pay attention to the speaking part. Presence is also touch. We have touch, which is a communication method, and presence. Sometimes just being silent and being there is a way that we can communicate to people. We have to practice with competence. And competence comes when we roll our nursing education and with some other people type skills. We have to desire to be the best we can, and we have to fully know and understand the whats and the whys of caring for people and what we are doing for them. We also have to make some connections, and that kind of goes back to the fact that you need to know your patient. But by making those connections with that patient, they can accept us perhaps a little bit better as we journey with them on their path in life, as needing care. We have to discern and we have to make decisions. Some days that's kind of a hard thing to do. We also have to prioritize. What do I do first? And when people have a long list of needs, we have to look at the very first thing. So usually what we go to is, are they breathing? And that will kind of, lead us on the path that what we need to do next for them. We have some attributes, and we have to have love of mankind, love of ourselves. Humility. I always would tell my students, you need to be humble. Arrogance is not going to get you very far. And it doesn't matter whether you're a nurse or you have chosen another walk in life. Humility is such an important thing to be included in our lives. We have to be present. We have to be there to serve. We have compassion and we have empathy. We also have to be forgiving, and this was another thing that I learned. I understood what forgiving meant, and outside of being a nurse, I got it. But when I did my prep work, there was an interesting little chapter about being forgiving. And in this forgiving component, it talked about the patient who doesn't always do what they're supposed to do. So they come back to see us frequently. We have to accept that even though we work really hard with them, we get them back on their feet. For whatever reason, it's their choice not to do maybe all of the things. So we have to forgive them, and we still have to take care of them. So I learned that. And now maybe when that person who comes in or says to me, I quit taking some of my medication because, with my COPD, which is the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, I'm feeling just great. Well, they do feel great some days when they're on some of that medicine, and then all of a sudden, if they don't follow that regime, then they don't. But that is one of those diseases that really controls their life. They can't really, it's probably even more controlling than a severe diabetic in that relationship. So, I have to forgive those people, and I will the next time I find someone who isn't necessarily compliant with certain behaviors that would keep them healthy. And we have to be willing to give of ourselves. I don't think as nurses that we recognize that we do, but we will dot every I and cross every T, and we're going to make sure that that person has everything that they need. So sometimes when the shift is over or the day is done, we might still be there because we got to finish our work. It's hard for us to leave something undone. And I think sometimes as nurses that carries over into our other life, and it's just kind of got to be completed, or we aren't going to rest until we know it's done. Practice with ethical principles of justice, I pretty much discussed with all of you. Beneficence, we have to be kind. And the next one is non-maleficence, and we cannot do any harm and should not. We're accountable. We have to answer for our actions. We have something called autonomy, which allows us and gives us the freedom to make decisions. We make these decisions in reference to our educational processes, our background, but also with the scope of practice within nursing. And then there's veracity. We have to be very truthful. We have to tell the truth to our patients. We have to be honest with them. And sometimes in my practice, and in my journey as a nurse, I run into people who aren't necessarily honest. I don't think it's an intentional move, but I think sometimes they just can't bring themselves to tell the truth because the truth is going to be an issue for maybe the person's life expectancy. So, we don't want to make them feel bad, but that would be an example of that. Historically, yes, I come from a long line of nurses. For whatever reason, there seems to be that affinity, and I am a third generation nurse out of 5 generations of nurses. I think she would be the great, maybe third great grandmother, was basically a lay midwife. And she practiced in the community. My cousin Linda has a little article that talks about her, because Linda shared that with me. And she would go to the homes to help moms deliver their babies. And apparently she was very well known for her skills, but she did that in an era where, we didn't have the nursing education programs, and they weren't licensed back then. Historically, the Stone Age, way back then, and in early civilizations, health and medicine were kind of a key piece of that life. I can only imagine when I think about the Stone Age, what that care must have been like, but, they have, suffered through, and life just continues. And also, people in our past they don't all have a Christian belief, or the same Christian belief that we do, but they still have they engage with and have an underlying presence of this greater being. They recognize that. And again, care, they make sure that there's care related to that belief and relational to health and medicine. And another thing that led the impetus for nursing or healthcare in general, and I think that it might be wise, and I can, if people are interested, I can leave you sort of like a summary, or get a summary, and maybe Nikki can make some copies of that for you. But disease, pestilence, and war influenced health and the need for someone to care for those impacted. And you know what? When I put this in, I looked at disease, pestilence, war. I can even add famine to all of that. Some things have not changed over time, because you think about where we are at this point in time, many years later, we have more convenient kinds of things than what they did, but we still have these things going on. And then, in that early Christian era, healthcare was provided by various sorts of individuals, including Christian and Catholic individuals. And again, a long history that I could probably give you, it will outline those things and maybe you can do some research on that. But there's somebody that we call Florence Nightingale, those of you that are nurses, and she showed up around the early 1800s. Florence was a Christian person and recognized that nursing was tied to a spiritual calling. And to illustrate, I want you to listen to her words. Every nurse should be one that is depended upon, must be religious, must have respect for the calling, because God's precious gift of life is placed in our hands. She also laid the groundwork for the beginning nursing education programs that then progressed to the nursing education programs that we have today that are inclusive of looking at nursing as an art and a science. And sometimes Florence in her past, has got kind of a bad rap, but when I did research on her, she really offered us much. So I guess the truth of the matter is I always knew that I wanted to be a nurse. But sharing this with all of you, I kind of understand why I became a nurse. And I also had to reflect on that word vocation, which has Christian application. And I sort of had that perception that it really belonged to a religious sort of person, because of, the vows they take or their work. I never really thought about nursing as a vocation, maybe as a profession, but it does refer to the divine call to actively engage and embrace a particular state of life on behalf of God and community. Well, I think that nursing fits that bill. So in my case, it was the nurse's vocation of caring, and for me, it is to serve the sick. And also, to be honest, I have a little trouble with the word serve, but I have, gained a whole different appreciation for that word. So anyway, and I really can say this was in God's hand, and it was his plan for me to be a nurse. And oftentimes I've thought, what could I do besides being a nurse? Well, I thought once it might be nice to work at Myers or, whatever, but not anymore. I get that I am to be a nurse, and probably like my mother, I will always carry that little part of me with me. Okay, let's talk about this nursing servant and understanding that. That's kind of a new term. And I have a book that I've read and reread several times about that because, I think of that word servant. It's used in a lot of different ways. And I often remember my mom and dad had a lot of funny little sayings over time. Actually, many people in our family have funny little sayings. But she would always say, God gave you a mind, and you use that mind to know right from wrong, was one example of that. So, or the other word that you see oftentimes tied to nurses is handmaid. And I'm thinking, that's not my cup of tea either. But handmaiden and servant kind of have that same definition. So, you know what? I got over it when I read and understood fully what those meant. That servant part is giving all to people and doing for them. And with that comes, my ability to have somebody trust and do all those other things that I mentioned, such as assessing, my advocacy role. I have to make a decision. That's all part of that servant and the caring component that goes with that. Okay, so then some of the other things that I guess helped me in my journey or that I've done in my journey. we have to understand what those entrusted to our care experience. And so sometimes we have to get into their shoes or understand where they've been and why they are the way they are. And if we don't, I think we will make some mistakes again. We are just plain people as nurses, but we're willing to give. We have to follow rules, though, and sometimes we have to come in the back door instead of the front door. And can I say I'm guilty of this? Oh yes, I am, because of my strong sense that I want to give and make sure my patient has everything that they need. And the little example that I'm going to give to you happened to me, just about 4 weeks ago. And we were at Leland, and I got a phone call. Brad and I were on our way out in the boat, and a lady by the name of Willa called me, and she goes, "Beth, I think I'm having a TIA." Now this lady's 86 years old, and there's no grass growing under her feet, trust me. So I said, "Okay, Will," and she goes, "I know you're going out on the boat." I said, "Yes." So Brad turned the boat around, and I went, and I said, "Willa, I'm going to call, 911, which I did, and she obviously was having some, issues on her right side. Her foot was dragging, and she couldn't use her hand as well. So the ambulance came, and I said, "No, Willa, I'm coming to the hospital with you." She goes, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Yes, I am. I do not want you to be there alone." So she went in the ambulance, and I drove to Munson. And I thought, now how am I going to get in? Because, COVID alters certain things. So basically, they said, "Well, are you a relative?" And I thought, okay, yeah, I am a relative. And I said, "I'm a nurse." And I said, "I'm the one that called and wanted her to come to be cared for because I recognized this." So pretty soon out comes the social worker. And I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. And she goes, "Well, how are you related?" I said, "We share relatives." And I said, "I do not want her to be alone." I said, "Her daughters, 2 of them are 2 hours away, and the other one's, in the UP. So I do not want her to be alone till they get here." And guess what? I got in. But that was important for me. Plus, Willa in her lifetime has hardly had any hospitalizations at all. And so the doctor came to see me. He shared with me what was going on. He also asked me some questions relevant to her care because I had been with her. I'd seen her the night before, and I, saw her after she called me. And so he explained things, and then he took me back to her. So I sat with her till her daughter Mary arrived. But he came back in then, and he talked to Willa and to I again. And so then I switched with Mary and went on my way back home again to Leland. But I felt good about that, even though I guess you could say I bent the rules. I wasn't maybe truthful, 100% truthful, and I came in the back door. But I met that person's needs. And another time I probably would do this. I've not ever had to do it, but if at all possible, when people are in their last stages, I do not want people to have to be alone. And having experienced what's gone on here with all of our COVID, I felt very traumatized as a nurse, I guess, for lack of better words. I felt so bad that so many people had to be alone. They had the tender, loving care of their nurse, but many people had to be alone. That's just how that rolled. Nobody really asked me, but maybe I could have come up with a plan, or several other people could have come up with a plan. I don't know, but so the best I could do was to keep those people in my prayers. All right, there's some connections as a nurse. We have to be trustful, or we have to share our trust. And sometimes that really shows itself up when we are caring for the terminal ill patient or the dying patient. I had the opportunity, I shouldn't say opportunity, as a nurse, I can tell you I would not make a good pediatric nurse. I would not make a good NICU nurse because all I would do would be cry. Healthy children, yes, I can take care of them, but those little ones, no. At any rate, I was in hospice, and during my time at hospice, within 3 months, and for the first time in my nursing career, I had 3 children in my caseload, and all 3 children passed away, all within a couple weeks of one another. So the second little one that I had to make a visit to, I got to the home, I knocked on the door, I got ready to say, "I'm Beth, I am." I stood there, and the tears ran down my cheeks. I just was a mess. And the mama looked at me, and she said, "I know you care, and I can trust you." So this nurse had to get her act together and wipe away the tears. I've prayed with people at the very end of life to help them let go. I've seen much of this in my lifetime. I also have tried, as a nurse, to be there and to help this person, to encourage them. It's okay. Your family's okay with this. And one little area that kind of was very amazing to me, I guess it was sort of enlightening in that respect. There was a lady that I took care of. She had pretty much, her physician was one who was a very good physician, but always operated on the premise that he could fix people up. So he put her through a lot of treatments, and then it appeared that she got better. So the treatments got to stop. And then the disease came back with vengeance. And he had the audacity to tell her, "Well, I knew this was going to happen to you." So needless to say, this nurse wasn't so happy. But again, that person had put trust in someone, but the trust really was not there. So anyway, it came time for her passing, and the family, wanted to be there with her, and they were. But she was very, very restless, and as a hospice nurse, the family's instructed they can give medications or whatever. Well, that didn't work, so they called me, thinking that perhaps, I might have that little touch to help her go. No, I did all the things that I was supposed to do, and the family and I prayed. So I said, maybe we better call the minister. So the minister came. He said the Our Father, and the lady passed. And I think she needed that person. She needed maybe the rest of us. She heard us. That person gave her the permission that she needed to have. Sometimes as a nurse, because families, caring for a loved one is very intense. And sometimes the family can only take so much. And yes, there's a little saying about God gives us only what we can handle. But as a nurse, sometimes I've wondered about that process. So have I asked God? Yes, I have. I've asked him maybe to intercede because I worry about the family. I know that the person, I may worry about them, but I worry about the family. I have learned from a patient that I took care of for a lot of years. She was one of the first patients that I met soon after I went to work at the health department. And she lived in an area, and her house was pretty much pretty disheveled. You had to get through the junk cars. Sometimes you altered your breathing pattern when you walked through the back door, and you had to make sure you didn't step in the hole and trip in the front door. And then, you know, the kitchen was filled with pots and pans, but if you came to my house right now, that's what you'd see. But anyway, she had a car accident and it rendered her at a quad, although she had use of her arms. She ran the household from just a simple gurney, and you know, it was set up so we could flip her, so we could change her positions. You know, so she didn't have so much pressure on the areas. The family was an excellent family. They took good care of her. They took her places, you know, places you might have seen her at the fair. You know, I'm no lie on that one. They've taken her camping. But anyway, from time to time she had to go in because she would get an open sore on her tailbone. So they'd close it up. Well, the last time that she went to the hospital, she kept telling the nurses to open the curtains. And this was during the night. And they'd say, now Gladys, you know, we got to shut the curtains, you know, because we don't want all that bright light on there, and you know, you got to go to sleep because tomorrow you're going home. And she told them, I'm going home. Please open the curtains. And this went on, the nurses shared several times. And guess what? Gladys went home, but home was not back to her house. Home was in heaven. She knew, and I have discovered over time that people innately know when their time is coming. And I, as a nurse, will process that. So sometimes a person will say, I need to talk to the pastor, or I need to talk to a pastor. Trust me, I get on the phone and I make that phone call. Now, it may not be tomorrow this happens, that the person passes. It might be 3-4 months, or, you know, it may be several, but that is truly a need for a person. So I've been able to help people with that process. And then, getting back to sometimes physicians, they really have a hard time, and you would think, because of all the things that they see, that they would have sort of a grip, so to speak, of that. Maybe not everything that I do is always going to work for my patient. So another time, I got a call. This was when I was working as a hospice nurse, but I also knew this patient. And the physician treated the person appropriately, but the treatment really wasn't working. He never shared that with the patient, nor did he share that with the husband, nor did he share that with the children. Now, I had the opportunity to interact with this person, and she and I had a little conversation. She knew this was not going to be an outcome, that she would be still on earth. She knew that her time was close. One morning, I got a call, and they said, oh, she's having trouble breathing. These are the things that are going on. So I went, and my inclination as a nurse was, she can probably stay here. This person and I communicated with our eyes, because she knew that if she left her house, or whether she stayed, her time of leaving this earth was very close. So the best I could do for her was to give her a big hug and send her by ambulance to the hospital, knowing full well that the husband had no idea what was to come, let alone her children. So again, I put on my little cap as, you know, as an advocate, and I called the hospital. I said, you are going to be receiving this patient. The person is so-and-so. And I said, the person is very aware of what's going on. But I said, the husband nor the children have any concept of what the outcome was going to be here. And within 36 hours, she left us. But again, the physician hadn't been truthful, and, you know, to me that was without being truthful. that lacks a lot of trust. I guess I can appreciate the fact that he wants to heal everybody, but we still have to be truthful in our processes. Again, assessing needs. Are we always doing those things? And I think of a time that I was in a facility, and I was not an employee of the facility, but I had students there. And I noticed this lady. She'd been there for a while, but she was a little bit on the younger, and she was alert and oriented, but she had I think there was a wound on her ankle, and she had one maybe on her tailbone and some other place. And sometimes when the students were there, I would help, and so I would pick up her breakfast tray or lunch tray. And I thought, she's not eating. All this food is still left. A little bit she picked at. So I said, I've noticed this for a while now. I said, how come, you're not eating your food? And she looked at me and she said, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. So Seventh-day Adventists have particular things that they will eat or they won't eat, and meat and some protein is one of those. So what did she get? Eggs, bacon. Now that would have been my cup of tea for a breakfast, but it wasn't for her. So she only ate the things on her tray that met her dietary, beliefs in reference to her religion. I said, have you shared this? And she said, yes, I've shared that. So once again, guess what happened? My advocacy hat got stuck on my head. And I went back into the chart, and I looked, and right there it is, Seventh-day Adventist. So I said to the nurse, I said, were you aware? Well, no, not really. I went down to the dietary department, and I try not to overstep my bounds because in the role that I really was in, I'm a guest with these students, so I didn't want to undo something, but I had to take care of this. And they said, oh no, we really didn't realize that. I said, aren't there some things that we can prepare for her here that she can eat that will help the wound healing? But she'd been there for a long time, and this had been the pattern. And so I was sort of like coming in maybe at more the tail end of the middle process. And again, they did fix her appropriate meals, but it probably was too little too late at that point in time. But again, you have to assess. You have to assess the needs. And this could have been another reason. It may not have been because she was a Seventh-day Adventist. She might have had an allergy. She might have been averse to that. So you have to, as a nurse, we have to look at those things. We have to protect and defend the vulnerable and the weak. And again, as a nurse, I've fallen into this category as well. I've had to file a complaint with Child Protective Services and for a child and for elder abuse. And I've had to do this more than one time. You want to talk about having something pull at your heartstrings? Oh boy. Especially for the child. I had to do that before I had children. I had to do it again after I had children. And so, while it's not very healthy, after I did it, I had to block it from my mind because every time I thought about it, oh boy, I got really, really upset. And in the end, in reference to the children that I had to file for, you recognize that maybe there's some other things going on that have impacted it. So we were able to get, the needed care or the needed help for those people, so the child returned. In reference to the elder abuse, I feel that the daughter wanted to take care of her mother. She felt comfortable doing that. But I did notice when I would go, there was always on the kitchen table, there was a lot of beer bottles and cans and all such things or whatever. And, if I got there in the morning, that daughter's behavior was one way. And if I got there in the afternoon, the behavior was a little different. And then when I started to give care to this person after a while, I noticed handprints. And they were handprints. They were rough handprints. So if you would grab somebody really hard, you're going to leave an imprint. And that lady had those. So I called the physician, and the physician got involved. And yes, we had to take the lady out of the home because it basically, the daughter would have been probably what we call a closet alcoholic. And while she may have had the best intentions, taking care of the sick mother was way too much for her. So in the end, the daughter got help, and the mom was placed in, a facility where she would get good care and would be attended to as need be. So that is still one of the things that, I've had to do in my role or in my journey as a nurse and caring for people. And probably one more thing that really, this was early on in my career. I took care of a very vulnerable person. She was a diabetic and she lived by herself, and she early on could make her own transfers, but she'd had an amputation below her knee, so she couldn't stand. So she had caregivers, and that all was quite fine until she got a caregiver who guaranteed her that she would always be there and that the lady could stay in her home, because over time the lady's condition deteriorated, and no, she shouldn't have been alone, and she had no family. This lady coerced her into signing her property over to her. So once again, I, the social worker, we all reported this, but this was early on, and nobody did anything about it. So maybe this wasn't healthy or isn't healthy on my part, and maybe God will have a discussion with me someday. But guess what? The lady that got that, in an appropriate way, she got stuck with a lot of bills. Do I see that as maybe some compensation for what she did? Yes, but every time I drive by that house, I see that. And the house is still there. That happens to me a lot when I drive around Ionia County. I find places that I've been and things that I've done, and I think about those patients. And so it's kind of interesting. You think, oh, you forget, but I haven't. We have to make a difference, and sometimes we fall into that by just a coincidental thing that we do for someone. And, it might be you run into the daughter and she says, oh, you did this for my mom. We really appreciate that. You might not even recall it. But I had another experience again. I cared for a gentleman when I worked in home care, and he had a wonderful family. He was a farmer, and he had a stroke, and so he was unable to communicate. He's a great big tall man, and his little tiny wife, about the size of Rosemary, she took really good care of him. Well, anyway, I hadn't seen him in about 5 years. Again, I had nursing students. And I noticed that the nurse was interacting with this person, so I kind of stuck my head in. And I recognized him, and he recognized me, and I said, oh, mister. And he just lit up. And the nurse caring for him said, do you know him? And I said, oh yeah, I've spent a lot of time with this person. But again, there's been this big absence because now I was working at the college. So after the fact, I worked with that nurse and a few other ones there to help them understand how to communicate with him. And so, and in doing so, I guess I felt I provided some more human dignity for him, because it's very hard for people when they can't communicate and say what they need or what they maybe need to tell us. So I said to him, I left that day and I stuck my head back in the room and I said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he smiled at me. So I go back in the next day with my nursing students. And I said, oh, did you move, Mr. So-and-so? And they go, he passed. So I guess when I think back to that, I probably was there for a reason. Yeah, I was there for the nursing students, but I think I was there at that right time just to help things for that gentleman. That's one of those experiences that I carry with me. I will always carry with me. We have to generate excitement, and we have to provide a nurturing environment. So as a caregiver, I can tell you, when I worked in OB, the birth of that new baby, oh my heavens, that was such an exciting experience. I don't care that it wasn't my baby, it was just this beautiful little masterpiece that God had created, and it was such a pleasant experience to pop that baby on Mama's chest and to see Daddy's reaction. Oh, what a wonderful experience. And also, when the patient who has some unbelievable health issues gets well and returns to a healthy life. And I have a friend who has experienced that. And really, I kept getting an email, please pray, please pray. This person went to the hospital for a simple hemorrhoidectomy. Early 50s, no health concerns. By the time he got done with that whole process, and this man probably weighed, very tall man, probably weighed in at about 285, 300. He got down to 140 pounds or less. At any rate, they were looking into having a lung transplant for him. He had cardiac issues. He ended up with issues related to nutrition. I mean, it was just a mess. But guess what? I think all of those prayers really helped, and he's with us. And if you saw him today, you would not know that he had been through that. There's another little part of this person too that I told him that because I could. I said, I'm not sure God was ready for you. And then another component that we do as a nurse is teach. And again, we got to understand when we teach or when we interact with that patient, who they are and what they understand and what they understand about themselves. When people are told they get to go home, we have to hurry up and get things done for them so that you're lucky if you get 24 hours, let alone maybe 36 hours in the hospital, something like that. But this gentleman, he was a cardiac patient. And again, I was in the hospital because I had students, and the students had done a really good job teaching. And because he had a newly diagnosed cardiac condition, they went over the cardiac diet. But guess what? We didn't ask him where he ate and what he ate. So when it came time to be discharged, he goes, oh, this is going to be so good. I'm going to go to McDonald's on my way home. And I'm like, oh my God. And I rolled my eyes, not so that anybody saw it. So I said, well, you're just going on your way home because you probably are a little tired of this hospital food. Oh no, I ate there 2 meals a day. I'm thinking, all that teaching we didn't really explore, and the man never said. So again, that was one of those situations where we needed to do a really good assessment. So anyway, and then I got to be a nurse educator. And like the people that we care for, I had to discern and understand my students so that I could provide what they needed as far as knowledge and to help them with their skills so that they could progress to being a nurse. And I tried to be a good role model, including being compassionate and very empathetic with them. And sometimes, they worried because the area that I taught in, I got those brand new nurses. Sometimes we called them baby nurses, but I got in trouble for that because we really can't put that title on that. But basically, they were baby nurses. It's like being the kindergarten teacher. And trust me, if you're a kindergarten teacher, you've earned your crown in heaven. The students are always real anxious to start this journey, but they're anxious because it's like, oh my heavens, what am I going to do? So I always try to provide a nurturing environment for their learning, and I would say, I understand, it's all new. I'm going to walk you through the process. And I really did try to assure them that I wasn't going to fly around on my broom, because I didn't, And, but again, from the time they walked in the door till 8 weeks later, I got to see their growth. And then I got to see them at the very end, because when they would do what we call leadership, and it's just before they graduate, it's so much fun to see where they started and where they ended. But there is a lot of nursing time that went into that. Not all my time, but my colleagues or whatever. So again, that role modeling was there, the nursing knowledge, the expertise, and the experience I had to give to them from who I am. And I'm soon to get you out of here. I just got a couple more spots that we got to talk about. So as I prep for this, and trust me, along with eating those potato chips, and I even got into the M&Ms pretty heavy, I found this little passage, and it says, to me, and as I reflect on serving as Christian nurses, we are part of a ministry that provides compassionate care for the whole person in response to God's grace toward our world, which facilitates optimum health and peace by bringing comfort in suffering and in death to anyone in need. I've tried to provide you with, different experiences as a nurse in my nursing journey. And I have to tell you that in my years of serving, or as a servant, of being a nurse or a servant leader, it gives me, great solace and validates my calling, and I am very thankful. And in serving others, I guess, as I reflect back, I probably, as they put in the little thing, that I never really mentioned God. I probably didn't mention God, but it was my actions that were the works of God that the person experienced. And okay, because as a nurse I could do those things, but I really want to urge all of you to think about what you do in life. Not all of you are nurses, but all of us are individuals that have, inner relationships with people, and we give of ourselves. Each one of you has a vocation, and you need to use it. And you have the ability to serve and do good works, because that's basically what my journey is as a nurse has been, a lot of good works. With love of God and love of one another as humans. That's what sets us apart. And I have really one last little thing that I'll share with you. And then you can go home, maybe get some M&Ms, because this has been a traumatic experience listening to me. But anyway, it's called the Prayer of the Nurse Servant Leader. Gentle God, teach me to listen with my heart to those who are anxious and afraid. Teach me to give generously of myself to those seeking acceptance and understanding. Teach me to minister with mercy and compassion to those who are wounded in body or spirit. Teach me to caringly access the needs of those who are suffering and sorrowful. Teach me to courageously advocate for those who are marginalized and underserved. Teach me to wisely discern decisions which will be healing and comforting. Teach me to lovingly strive to make a difference for those seeking solace and consolation. Teach me to be unfailing, present to the concerns of those I serve. And teach me to joyfully embrace my nursing vocation of caring. Teach me, dear Lord, to become a nursing servant leader worth of my calling. Amen.
Amen.
And lastly, I thought I'd bring my mat, which you know, I worked kind of hard for, but I didn't wear it very long at all. And the other little thing that I've had, you know, is this is my mom's prayer book. This was given to her in her nursing program, and it's very interesting to look at that. So my mom graduated in 1943 as a nurse, so this little baby is pretty old. And that was something that was, you know, most nurses that graduated from a school of nursing that had a religious affiliation were given something like this. And I wore my pin and also my mom's pin. So this is it.
Thank you so much, Beth. She was a little nervous preparing for this, but I think you had no reason to be whatsoever. You did fantastic. We have a couple additional upcoming events. Our final Year of St. Joseph speaker event will be held on October the 13th, and we have invited Father Stephen Durkee, the Director of Vocations, and he'll be presenting on St. Joseph, the Protector of the Holy Church. Coming up on October 2nd through 4th, our marriage ministry is hosting Dr. Ray Garendi. Saturday night is a date night, which includes dinner and has an RSVP you can find at the website. And Sunday and Monday evenings are community events that you are all invited to as well. In November, we're offering a Tribute to Life workshop, which helps us go over our end-of-life issues and allows you to prepare for a Christian rite of burial. So whether you are 19 or 99, this will be something you need to plan eventually, so you might as well start now. And at the end of November, we're going to conclude our Year of St. Joseph with an opportunity for those interested to participate in a consecration through St. Joseph. This is an in-depth study on the life of St. Joseph that will actually reflect on a lot of the stuff that we've actually been going along all this year as a lead up to it. We'll be sending out more information about this soon. So I'd like to close us in a quick prayer and we can be done. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Father, I am a fervent believer in your timing and trust in you. But currently there are things that are becoming hard to wait any longer. My faith is still in your timing. Please help me to be more patient and provide me with the strength I need to wait until your timing presents itself. Amen. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you all join us again in October. Thank you.